So, is it researchable? And you need to look at the scope. So, are your questions too broad? Do they lack the appropriate parameters that are difficult to research? So, for example, let's say the topic is disease. And here will be a question: what is the best way to reduce the issues that result from chronic disease? Well, that's a very broad topic. That's a lot to have to consume, and it doesn't have specific direction. So basically, you're just setting yourself up for unending research, and that's not what we need. So here we go. What is the best way to reduce the prevalence of irregular heartbeats in babies that are born premature? That is specific, that is focused, and that gives you a narrower scope, literally, of what you have to consume and research. So, genuine points of debate. Is the answer to your question obvious? If it is, then you cannot use it. So, for example, is cancer bad? Yes. Do sports help athletes physiologically? Obviously. So we don't need to say that. Okay. Is your question a whataboutism? Is it a trivial point raised in the bigger picture? If that's the case, no. Okay. So we could talk about what about isms as far as let's say we were talking about, because we're still talking about songs, we could talk about protests at MAGA rallies versus Black Lives Matter. What about? We could talk about results and all this other stuff. So we could talk about whataboutism, but it's not really a debatable question. There's those are just two sides of the same coin, and it's not really getting at the crux of the matter, okay, or whatever your topic may be. Debate is usually through context. So what you may want to talk about is instead of like looking at it MAGA versus Black Lives Matter, which is a obvious whataboutism, you could say something like, what are the limits to our First Amendment rights? And then apply them to both movements, or see where movements may have gone too far or may have not, or whatever. So, or how people may perceive them, and then talk about, is it within or is it not within? Okay, and that would be something you could research, and it's debatable. Okay, is drug addiction an issue that we should attempt to solve? Obviously, yes. It's not a debate, so experts wouldn't argue that we should not. Okay, so that's not something. So what is the best way to treat heroin addiction is not only narrowing your scope, but it also is specific, and it's something to be debated. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different viewpoints on how to approach heroin addiction. All right. So invite engagement with alternative perspectives. So if you were doing the whataboutism, it doesn't give you alternative perspectives. It just gives you like an either or, and those perspectives are very limited. So here's a good, and so for that example, but here's a good example of another way this wouldn't work. So why should the immoral use of nuclear weapons be banned? Well, first of all, that's a loaded question, okay? And so there's only one way you can answer it, and you can't come up with alternative positions or alternative perspectives because how you've phrased the question. So another way is, should the United States work to ban the proliferation of nuclear weapons? And that's a debate. And there's different perspectives. Are the questions simple and not multiple? So for example, I've had a lot of you do this. And so please be sure that you're simplifying your question. How should we eliminate privacy concerns people have about using social media, and also punish companies who fail to abide by these policies? Those are two different topics, okay? And so you would essentially be trying to cram in two papers into one, and that's an unfocused thesis. You can't argue both at the same time. So here we go. What type of legislation would best require social media companies to guard the private data of users? How should social media companies be held accountable for illegal use of user data? Okay, those are two different topics that can be researched and have different perspectives and are debatable. All right, so here's where you should be. Okay, how do you transition from your research topic to your research question? So you need to go ahead and look at like some sources, and I would advise you to look at academic journals. Okay, now I understand maybe you have some cursory media topics that kind of point you in the right direction. Use those secondary sources to help you find primary sources so you can find experts in the field. Okay, do you want to take a position that's a conclusion or a solution? So you need to decide before you write the question, because that determines your STEM. And then write a draft of your research question with all the components in mind. So you can make changes to your question throughout, and you need to kind of specify a place, population, event to narrow the parameters of your research. So, and the reason why you want to do that is because it helps you narrow your scope. And let's be honest, you guys don't have a lot of time. So the as long as it's with that is debatable, but it's not so broad that you are having to bring in a whole lot of different contexts or a lot of different sources from a lot of different places and a lot of different purviews to get at the crux of your argument. All right. So keep that in mind as we go forward. I hope this helps. I'm going to, along with this little review, I'm going to post the AP seminar lectures in hopes that they help as well. So good luck.